A massive pandemic sweeps across the country, evictions are banned, but yet mortgages are still due. I'm going to go ahead and talk about this today. What are the options for us landlords and even tenants? I want to have the discussion where we come to an agreement. I've discovered a lot of really great ways to either handle this situation. Of course, everyone's trying to figure it out. This hasn't happened. It's pretty much record-breaking. It's historical. So let's go ahead and figure out what do we do about this situation. All right, so unless you've been living under a rock or have already been in your house in a quarantine, you already know that for the last 2 weeks, for the most part, the entire country has been in a quarantine. A lot of people are losing their jobs, and a lot of people can't go to work. They can't make their their rent payments. And even more so, a lot more has been caused when the government finally said, all right, we won't allow evictions. So this has kind of caused a bit of an upheaval. This is probably not being handled in the best way possible, because the fact that the government has paused sort of one set of payments, but then not the others where the landlords are concerned. So it's kind of causing a little bit of a war between the landlords and the renter. So what I wanted to do was first figure out what in the heck was going on with my own situation. I also have a job that kind of went a little bit nuts when this whole thing happened, prevented me from creating some videos, but I'm back at it, and I did have to have a couple of those talks. I had to have the talks with those tenants who can't pay rent, they can't pay at all, they don't have a job. I verified it, and I had to figure out, what do I do about the situation? Because obviously, as mentioned, my mortgage is still in place. Well, one of the first things that I did was not make a decision immediately. Now, at this point in time, the first is already right around the corner, so you might have already come up with your plan with the tenant. Maybe some of them have already reached out to you. That's a highly recommended thing. Have that discussion with the tenants. Figure out what it is that their situation is. Some of them, I reached out to them. I already knew they worked at gyms, they worked at public services centers, and so I already knew, okay, they're probably going to be in a bit of a bind. And I came up with a unique option that is catered to each different tenant. And it's important for you to have those conversations, because otherwise the tenants might think you don't care as a landlord, and you as a landlord need to know that your tenants are not thinking, oh, they can't evict me, so I won't pay rent. So that goes into a few of our misconceptions that we do want to clear up for landlords and tenants. Number one, just so you guys know, all you landlords know, just because the rent evictions are postponed doesn't mean that rent is not due. It is actually still technically due. In fact, all it's going to do is end up stacking up on the tenant until eventually the civil courts open up, and then it becomes a nightmare as they can't pay off the massive lump sum that they probably weren't able or couldn't or just didn't save up for. That is kind of the worst case scenario for a lot of tenants, where a lot of them are actually kind of going on these rent strikes. And I say a lot, it's actually not that many, but for the most part, landlords don't fear necessarily the 20% of tenants who can't pay. They actually fear the 80% who possibly could try to take advantage of the situation, stop paying rent entirely, and then pretty much all the mortgages compound on the landlord. So, I mean, as most of us actual landlords know, landlords are not necessarily rich and greedy people whom own millions of properties or have tons of profit coming out of these things. In fact, the average profit from a single family home is actually really, really small, and you'd need quite a bit, maybe about 50 of them even, to really retire off of it. So it's certainly not the situation that a lot of tenants kind of think is in place, but you as a landlord are going to have to work with the tenant in order to clarify this whole situation with them. So I wouldn't recommend becoming antagonistic with the tenant. Remember, this is a crazy time in the country, and I think everyone should work with each other as much as possible. With that aside, since rent is still due, let's really talk about the 20% of tenants that I talked about, the ones who lost their jobs, because these are the ones we really need the options for. What do we do to help those who paid all the time, were always paying rent, and yet now can't due to a circumstance way beyond their control? And for that, I have 5 options that I've kind of come up with or read about or maybe seen that I've tried myself. I've talked to tenants myself trying out these options and seeing exactly what seems to work. And pretty much these 5 are the ones I've actually worked with. If you see any more, then you can absolutely let me know, and that'd be appreciated, and I can try that as well. As you're aware, I do manage over 20 tenants with my management company, and I can talk to a lot of different tenants to see how they respond to these different options and alternatives. So the first one I will say is the free rent option, probably actually the worst option. Now, it might feel like you're being a really nice person for doing this, and I will admit I did this option. You might be shocked, but yes, I have a tenant who couldn't pay rent anymore, and I gave them all of April for free. Now, keep in mind, I am in a situation that a lot of landlords are not in, and that is that I already don't pay rent, and because I house hack and I don't pay any mortgage for my own living conditions, I'm pretty much in a boat where I get 100% of my paycheck all the time. So I went really from paying no rent to now just paying rent, if you can kind of look at it from that perspective. So I don't actually recommend this option for most people. I happen to be in a circumstance where I could do it. Now, if you already happen to be very wealthy and you have tons of reserves and this is not going to impact you at all, then you too might be able to simply say, you know, hey, yeah, sure, have the month off for free. But even if you can do that, there's a lot of reasons you don't want to do this, and this is where really human nature kind of comes into play. The problem with the free rent option is, one, it really is not sustainable, and the issue with it is the tenant starts to get used to a lifestyle where the rent becomes free. Also, you can start to teach them that anytime a hardship happens, they can just ask for free rent. This might become an entitlement position. Unfortunately, in this business, as a lot of experienced landlords may come to realize, you can't exactly be too nice with your tenants. You can't be too nice because they will walk all over you in the future. Even my tenants, whom I gave free rent to, they're not going to suddenly feel like they owe me one or that I'm a nice landlord and they won't care about me more. No, they're still going to live their life exactly the same way. And if they ever have a hard time paying rent, then I will be the first one to feel the pain from that. So, I mean, even now in this situation, I don't think a lot of their spending habits have necessarily changed from me saying, oh yeah, free rent, make sure you save your money, build up a stockpile. So just keep that in mind, that this option, one, probably won't yield any benefits in the future for you, and two, can't really be carried for a long time, and really three, it could create an entitlement factor where they keep asking for this in the future. They may also, if they keep not paying the rent over the course of months, they may adjust their lifestyle to that. If anyone knows about lifestyle inflation, it actually happens in reverse as well. They will adjust their life to that. They will see more of their money being left in their bank account and they will spend accordingly. So this is something that you do have to watch out for. Obviously, this is not the case with every single tenant, so don't blanket make this across the rule. You know, analyze your tenants and see what kind of culture, environment, whatever neighborhood, whatever that they come from and that's what they're used to and how they already spend. They may already be frugal, but I'm telling you now, I even have one tenant who makes $170,000 a year and even he's living paycheck to paycheck. I'm not even kidding. The guy needed to ask me for a deferment and he couldn't pay the rent after literally this just happened. So just keep in mind it doesn't matter about how much money they make or, you know, stuff like that. There are a lot of tenants who really don't know how to manage their money, and giving them free rent won't necessarily help that. So the second option, which I'm really not a fan of, but I had heard about it as an option actually on Bigger Pockets, and so I wanted to go ahead and mention it here, was the credit card option. And that is basically you can have them pay rent with a credit card. Now, the idea behind this is really to use the fact that most tenants are in financial positions where they already have a massive amount of credit card debt and they sort of don't mind accumulating more. Now, I find this to be a little bit predatory in the sense that you are essentially relying on the idea that the tenant in their mind thinks, oh, well, I can defer the rent by using minimum payments. But really what just happened is they're paying probably triple to quadruple more on the rent that they bought. I mean, this is, you know, the case for all credit card debt holders. Essentially, they always pay more for everything than everyone else does. And you're just trying to simply use that deferment to the minimum payments to help them think they're actually getting it at a discount, or at least that they don't have to worry about it for now. I think this ultimately is going to ruin the life of your tenant even more. I really am not a fan of this option, and actually I did pitch it to one person. I felt immediately bad about it because even that tenant just felt almost offended about the idea of using a credit card to pay their rent. So they're not going to do it, unfortunately. So I don't know about that option. You can try it. You can let me know your results, but I do think it's going to make you sound kind of like an asshole. The next one I have also tried is the deferred rent option. That is basically to say, all right, April is not due, and we will take that mortgage amount and wrap it across the rest of the loan. Or not the mortgage, sorry, the rent amount. So basically, the way that option works is, let's say that their rent is $1,000 every single month, or $1,200. Let's just make the math easy. $1,200 every single month. Well, if they have 12 months left in their lease, you take April, make it free, and then divide that by the number of months left, and then now it'll become $1,300 starting in May and going forward until they make that payment back up. Well, this is probably one of the most widely accepted methods, is the deferment method. I've found most tenants like this option. The only problem with the option is it's not sustainable. Obviously, after doing this 2 or maybe even 3 times, the rent becomes to a point where they can never afford it anyway, and then you're really just kind of kicking them out. So ultimately, this really relies on this whole coronavirus situation only really lasting 1 month, maybe 2 max. After that, they're going to kind of run into a problem. Remember, we're not talking about the tenants who can pay. We're talking about the ones who actually did lose their jobs. So eventually that rent's going to hit to a point where they just can't do it. So a lot of tenants do like the deferment option. What I would say is the deferment option is fantastic for getting your tenants on a plan to get a new job. You don't want to necessarily force them to get a new job or encourage it too much, but what it does is it shows them, hey, look, we've given you a timeline in the future where you have this much time to kind of figure something out. And at least makes it where, unlike the free rent option, they don't feel like they can lay back and coast this whole thing. They feel like, okay, I'm in the same boat as the landlord. I also need to figure out a solution, and we got to all work together and work hard at figuring this problem. So the next one is the discounted rent option. So this one I actually favor quite a bit as well. A lot of tenants do like it. You can either just simply slash half the rent, which some rent is better than no rent, obviously, in paying these mortgages. It would help to hold back your reserves from being totally plundered in this event. Obviously, you can do some other methods. I've heard of ones where you, let's say, reward them by paying early. So now your tenants have an incentive to try to pay early, maybe 10% off of the rent. There's other ones where I've heard where, this one I haven't tried myself, but you pay so many months in advance. Let's say you know your tenants have a stockpile of money, they pay so much in advance, and then they get so many months free. Maybe an equivalence of like 3-to-1 sort of ratio. Like I said, never tried that. I don't know how many tenants will have that much money to just shell out, and whether they'll even want to in this situation, but that is an option I suppose you can pitch to them. So the discounted rent option, though, oftentimes in its most simplest form is just simply lowering the rent, saying, hey, I understand your situation, let's go ahead and lower it. You can say half, you can say more than half, I mean, whatever kind of works for you as a landlord, but you are keeping them accountable to thinking in the mindset of, okay, I still need to think about this. I still need to do something in order to make sure this rent gets paid. Let's all work out an option together. And then the final option is kind of a negotiation. So I have done this with one tenant where essentially it's kind of a blend of the other ones. I mean, you can say, okay, you don't have to pay like this rent for this month, but going forward, we're going to adjust your lease. So that way it's either a new amount, or maybe you extend it, or maybe, let's say the tenant's always been paying great and you actually want them to extend their lease, and that's an option. I mean, this is something that you see kind of in the almost refinance sector, is where you refinance your mortgage and then your mortgage is not actually due for a couple months or like usually 1 or 2 until the payments are. So it's kind of like, almost think of it like that. You're refinancing their rent and renegotiating all the terms and such. And it could put you in a favorable spot where you're doing a give and take sort of relationship. I mean, I would highly recommend not giving too much to your tenants necessarily for free without asking for something in return. Like I said, it can create a scenario where they're constantly asking you for things that almost sound kind of absurd. It can create an entitlement factor. So just be careful about taking that option. But essentially, the negotiation is just getting something else that you're looking for. Maybe they don't pay utilities, and now you're just going to have them pay the utilities, and then that factors into the rent later. I mean, however you want to do it, That's just something I have tried out, and a lot of tenants are pretty open to that option. So that's pretty much the 5 options that I have found and that I have actually tried. And obviously this is going to be a really hard road ahead because we really don't know how long this is actually going to last. I mean, this could go on for 1 month, and apparently Trump wants this to go by the end of April and then stop then, as of this, for recording this video. But I mean, we have some other conservative estimates saying 3 months, and so this could go on for a while. So ultimately, you may want to just keep that dialogue open with your tenant, just try to figure it out. And of course, if you really need to, you can move into some forbearance options, and this might help with the negotiation. And here is where we go into the place where tenants and landlords alike can all win. And if you don't know, the forbearance option is essentially you go to your bank and you ask for a deferment on your loan. Now, there's multiple different ways that a bank might do this, but keep in mind before you actually ask for the deferment on your loan, make sure it won't impact you on buying new houses. So keep in mind that some banks in the future or even now may not feel right about giving money or putting a loan on a property, one of your new properties that you might be buying or refinancing, if you already have forbearance going on an existing loan, even if your current is still good standing. But assuming everything is fine, then what you want to do is try to get the mortgage to be tacked on at the end of your mortgage. So basically you don't pay for 3 months, let's just say, and then those 3 months are essentially renegotiated back into your mortgage all the way at the end. Essentially, you're redoing the entire contract. Well, keep in mind, this is very different than the lump sum payment where you defer for 3 months and then pay on all one lump sum, which is honestly probably one of the dumbest options, and I think is really only there because the banks themselves don't know what to do about this situation. They're just trying to give themselves time. So if you do take that lump sum option, which in my mind doesn't make any sense because it's like, all right, well, it assumes you already were making income that entire time. It's kind of silly. But if they give you that option, then just make sure you do have the option to renegotiate your entire mortgage, maybe reamortize it, or in some way do some sort of payment plan. Using this method, you can then really give the best negotiation options to your tenant, maybe even possibly free rent, but then with a timeline. Hey, yes, you can have free rent for this time, and then explaining to them why they can have free rent, because in this crisis, you are getting also a mortgage that is now free. Now they know, okay, this is a special circumstance. 1, they have a time limit, so they still have to figure something out, but it's a lot longer. 2, they know that it's due to this very special circumstance, so this isn't going to happen in the future. This is just an unusual situation. And 3, now everybody wins. That is probably one of the best things that you can have going for you if you can do that. But otherwise, one of those other 5 options are some great options if for some reason the forbearance plans are not there for you, or just simply not good for you to take because it will completely hinder your investing in maybe a couple months' time. So that is it, everyone. That is my options that I have for you. If you like those options, or if you want to pitch some to me of your own, go ahead and tell me in the comment section below. We're all in this together, so I'd love to hear what else other people are doing. Maybe you're just giving the free rent like I did, just kind of like, okay, you know what, I can manage it, go ahead. Or maybe you really need them to pay as much as they can and help you out in this situation as well, and you need some of the other choices. Obviously, the more tenants that do this, the harder and harder this gets. So yes, I could give free rent to my first tenant that offered for this. However, if I had 5 or 6 more doing this, this would become a serious problem. So obviously, we need to take this very seriously and figure out what we can be doing. So let me know, comment below, and I will talk to you all very soon.